right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it. I'm Jennifer Bachner. I direct the Master of Science in Government Analytics program here at Johns Hopkins. And we host this Government Analytics Breakfast Forum along with REI Systems about every other month to bring together professionals and people in academia to talk about some of the analytic challenges faced by the public sector. We very much welcome your participation. I'll let our speakers determine if they want to take questions at the end or throughout, but we very much want this to be a discussion as well as a presentation, of course. Our presenters will they'll present for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. And I encourage you to tweet about the program using the hashtag GAB Forum. And we will post a recording of the event about 24 to 48 hours afterwards. So if you missed anything, you can rewatch a recording of the event, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, that would be wonderful. That's about it. Thank you so much for coming. We hope you get some good breakfast, and I will let my colleague Jeff introduce our speakers.
Great, thanks, Jen. So the reason that these forums exist, frankly, is to help create and strengthen the community of folks who are interested in doing work with analytics and supporting public missions in the government. It's the Government Analytics Breakfast. Part of that comes from having folks who are kind of doing cutting-edge work and have lessons that may be interesting to all of you. And so I'm really grateful that our speakers have come and agreed to talk with you a little bit about some of their experiences at the Security and Exchange Commission. But frankly, part of it also comes from you, the sorts of questions you ask, the exchanges that happen in the hallways, the breakfast discussion beforehand and a little bit after the meeting, for you to have a chance to both get to know each other and to learn who is it that might be able to help you solve a challenge that you're facing, or who may have a great idea that inspires you to try and tackle a new problem in a different way that will work better for you. So frankly, the purpose of this is for you to get to know each other and to learn from each other. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Jeff Myers. I'm with REI Systems, and we do analytics work with a number of different agencies, including parts of the Department of Homeland Security, Small Business Administration, NASA, and a variety of types of analytic work, managing data, visualizing it, and helping draw conclusions from it, advising agencies on how they use it. But really, the purpose of the breakfast, again, is about you. And so let me offer a brief introduction to our speakers. They actually have asked me to indicate that they will make their presentation and invite your questions and answers as they complete their presentation. So at my far right, we have Jennifer Diamantis. And Jennifer has been a lawyer with a wide range of financial agencies. She's currently, of course, with the Securities and Exchange Commission, but has also served with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And so she's got a wide range of regulatory and enforcement expertise, and has explicitly told me she's happy to talk with you if you want to talk a little bit about either those agencies or the SEC, or learn from the SEC, or if you've got something you think that the SEC would benefit from. Jennifer is the Associate Director and Chief of the Division of Market Intelligence. And I'd asked Jennifer and Austin Gerig to kind of talk a little bit about how the SEC uses analytics to target and evaluate and choose to where to direct their enforcement energies and resources, thinking that that might also be a topic that's interesting to a variety of agencies. And so Austin Gerig is also presenting, and he is not really satisfied in one place. So he's had experiences working and or studying in Australia, in Britain, in a couple of different agencies with the US government, and gained his PhD. They're actually both Midwesterners. Jennifer went to U of Michigan for law school, and Austin went to in Illinois for his PhD. And so they are both now in Washington, and I look forward to hearing from both of them and hope that you will have questions for them. And just as a warning, I've suggested to them they may ought to ask questions of you, to ask about some of your experiences working with your agencies and kind of perhaps compare kind of where we're all at. So with no further ado, let me invite Jennifer and Austin to make your presentation. And what we're going to do is target probably 20 to 30 minutes or so for the presentation, and then 30 minutes or a little more or less for question and answer afterwards.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's really a pleasure for us to be here today and present at today's Government Analytics Breakfast Forum. As Jeff said, I think these forums are really important to the analytic community. It's a great opportunity for all of us to get together and share our experiences and learn from each other. So we really, look forward to, hearing your questions, and also we will be around after the presentation to talk further. Because as you know, there may be some topics we can't get into, but we're happy to maybe follow up one-on-one afterwards if we can. And before we begin, Austin and I are just required to give a disclaimer and state up front that the views we express here today are those of our own, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or other Commission staff at the SEC. So today we're going to be talking about data analytics at the SEC with a focus on our enforcement and risk-based programs. As you know, the SEC is the primary regulator and enforcer of our federal securities laws. We're charged with protecting investors, maintaining fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and facilitating capital formation. So I'm an Associate Director and Chief of the Office of Market Intelligence, which is in the SEC's Enforcement Division. And in that role, I lead the Enforcement Division's Intelligence and Data Analytics programs. The Office of Market Intelligence, or OMI as we call it, houses several different groups and programs staffed by a diverse group of professionals. That includes analysts, attorneys, accountants, and market specialists. So it's really a pleasure working with such a diverse group of professionals. It's one of the great things I think about working with data and analytics. You really can combine the expertise of many different people, and when you do so, great things can happen. So within OMI, we have a group, it's called the Center for Risk and Quantitative Analytics. Just a slide here. We refer to them as CIRCA. They're located within OMI, and that group supports and coordinates the Enforcement Division's data analytic capabilities, tools, and activities. So CIRCA includes staff with advanced statistical and quantitative analytical skills, programming and development skills, as well as fraud analysts with experience in fraud investigations. OMI, including CIRCA, works very closely with the investigative staff and the Enforcement Division, so other attorneys, investigators, and other professionals, as well as other divisions within the SEC. Such as the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, DARPA. That's Austin's division, so you'll be hearing more about that division later on from Austin. And we also work closely with our Office of Compliance, Inspections and Exams, which we refer to as OC. A lot of acronyms in the government. We also interact and have partnered with other agencies. For example, we worked closely with FinCEN. Within OMI, we have a group who is dedicated to review and analysis of Bank Secrecy Act material, including SARS, suspicious activity reports. CIRCA has done projects with DARPA, that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects at Department of Defense. So sorry, I'll struggle over that acronym. But they have a program where they can partner with civil agencies and share some of their tools and technologies and provide an opportunity for agencies to maybe explore how they could possibly leverage some of what they've developed. So, analytics, including machine learning, is really providing a new model for enforcement. Securities law violations can be very difficult to detect. Many times the investors don't know that they've been the victim of a fraud or other misconduct, so we don't receive a specific tip or complaint that we can act on. Within the Office of Market Intelligence, we have a group that reviews all of the tips, complaints, and referrals that are submitted externally by the public, including whistleblowers, FINRA, exchanges, PCAOB, other agencies, as well as internal groups. And we get over 16,000 tips, complaints, referrals, or TCRs, as we call them, a year. So we get quite a bit of intelligence from those. But, again, you can't always rely on the investors to know when something has gone wrong. So while those tips, complaints, and referrals are extremely helpful, very valuable. We encourage everyone to continue submitting them. We still need to do more. And there are challenges in terms of being more proactive in enforcement. When we look at data, we look at a trade, a transaction, or other event, often when it's just considered on its own, or even with other trades or events around it, it can appear unremarkable. There may be no single aspect of a trade or action that's inherently suspicious, so sometimes there is no one red flag that points you to the wrongdoing. So in enforcement, whether it's civil enforcement or law enforcement, often you're looking for red flags, but sometimes they're not readily apparent. So analysis of large data sets, including SEC filings, disclosures, the trading data in equities, options, municipal bonds, and other securities, tips, complaints, and referrals, suspicious activity reports, and other information is really essential to detecting wrongdoing that may otherwise not be discovered, and it's essential to our investigations. So it should come as no surprise that as the size and sophistication and complexity of our securities markets grows, so does the variety, complexity, and volume of data. So as a result, it can be very challenging to determine what is suspicious and what to act on from a resource and investigative standpoint. So I imagine everyone here has experienced similar challenges. Just you're facing just more and more huge volume of data. Just to show of hands, anyone have that problem, or should I say, does anyone not have that problem? I appreciate it if you do not have that problem. Okay, not a single hand went up in the audience. And there are other challenges as well. So I don't know if anyone would like to offer a few from the audience. Any challenges you're seeing? Just size, complexity, scope. Anyone want to throw anything out?
There was one related to mobility of data. I know the federal government is looking at modernizing the mobility strategy across all the federal government, which is going to really increase your risk issue and enforcement, since data is going to be pushed down. Say the amount of data like NOAA. When you look at from a security standpoint, there's a whole lot of opportunity to create fraud once the data becomes mobile, whether it's the data pushed down or the data is pulled back. Is your department looking at how the newer technologies and things like that are going to impact your requirement to enforce?
Yeah, and so for those that couldn't hear, a great comment, talking about a risk and complexity presented by the mobility of data. Data is more mobile now. As it moves, as it transfers, it opens up more risks. And are we looking at that? Are we considering that? Yes. I think that implicates everything from security to other concerns, and I think we may touch on that a little later. But certainly, yes, that is definitely a challenge. So not only more and more data, it's located in many different places. It can be moved around. You have to access it. Some of it is kept, externally. Some of it's gathered internally.
I also think as federal agencies, we walk a fine line between being transparent to the public about our, processes and the services that we're offering, yet not being able to reveal too much if we're in the arena of compliance and enforcement.
Right. So comment about, transparency of data collection. We want to be transparent, but yet there's also confidentiality concerns, security concerns that we have to deal with. And in the back, one more.
So you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but complementarity of mission across agencies, or even across different governments, where there are similar regulatory functions across different governments, and similar kind of balance issues, how to see risks through the different lenses while at the same time respecting the different missions and different, privacy and other concerns of the different agencies and functions.
Yes, excellent point. So the comment was essentially, across government agencies, some of our data needs or interests may overlap. There's a lot of cross-market activity. Fraud and wrongdoing can implicate not just one market like securities, and may implicate other markets, other agencies. So then you get into issues around data sharing, between agencies, or perhaps data silos might exist between data in different agencies. So how do you tackle that problem, right? And I think we're very much about strong coordination with all of our regulatory partners. That's one of the missions of my office, as well as others at the SEC. So we coordinate extensively with other agencies. We coordinate extensively with FINRA as an SRO. We coordinate with exchanges, criminal authorities, and foreign authorities. We do quite a bit of interaction through our Office of International Affairs with foreign regulators as well, because now fraud is global. So, while we, along with many other agencies, as you say, have access to a voluminous amount of data, the challenge has really become, what do we do with it all? As the saying goes, we don't know what we don't know, and we have all this data in front of us. So how do we put our data, into context and create meaning from all this information? And how do we transform it into real insights and discoveries that will help us detect potential wrongdoing in the securities markets and protect our investors? So this is the challenge, right, that makes analytics a hot topic. This is the core challenge. So to tackle it at the SEC, one of the things we've done is we've integrated analysts and developers into the enforcement division and its programs. So this includes the analysts in CIRCA, as well as other analysts we have in the enforcement division that are embedded in investigative units, such as we have a market abuse unit that focuses and specializes in market abuse, insider trading, and other trading-related violations, and our complex financial instruments unit. And our attorneys, our investigators, our subject matter experts, our data experts, analysts, and developers all work together, and also in partnership with their colleagues in DARPA, Austin's division, OC, our exams division, and elsewhere, to design analytical models, approaches, tools, and techniques. And I just can't emphasize enough how critical this has been and how essential it has been in terms of allowing us to develop ways to obtain critical insights from our data that are more timely and valuable. So I think collaboration is key. No one on their own, really. The world, it's very complex and challenging, and you need to bring all those specialties together. So that's really, sounds simple, but it's challenging in practice to get diverse groups together and to work effectively together. There are a lot of silos that exist in different places. I think we've been very effective at the SEC at breaking those down and working collaboratively together. And I think that's contributed a lot to our developments and success with data analytics. So the enforcement division's making some great use of new tools and analytics to proactively identify many different kinds of threats to our investors, and to investigate and build cases against those who brought harm to investors. So here are a few specific examples I thought you might be interested in and could share. So the division has developed and now regularly employs sophisticated systems and analytical programs to identify and detect suspicious trading, and to assist in building potential cases involving insider trading and other trading-based violations. One successful program in this area utilizes and applies advanced analytic techniques to databases of literally billions of electronic equities and options trading records. So this program will rank trades based on different metrics, which we've identified, and there's a little bit of the secret sauce going on here, so can't share them all with you. But we have identified different factors and metrics to identify suspicious trading patterns and relationships among multiple traders. So this analytics program has allowed us to identify who is behind suspicious trading, even where we haven't gotten a complaint, a tip, a referral, or where traders have tried to, very hard to hide their relationship and their, collusion in their scheme. So analysis of trading data has really helped us identify parallel or insider trading despite efforts to obscure evidence of it in the physical world. So this program also enables us to find previously undetected traders who might be involved in existing investigations. So we may have a lead on one aspect of trading, and we can utilize this program to go through our trading data and identify others who may have been involved as well. It can also help us identify people who are repeatedly engaging in suspicious activity over and over and may warrant some further attention. So that is, I think, been a great success. It's been those programs have been directly responsible for many of our enforcement actions. In another example, we have a financial reporting and audit task force in the enforcement division. They partnered with DARPA on Austin's division on an analytical tool that allows staff to detect anomalous results and get potential investigative leads from large amounts of public company filing data. We've worked closely with DARPA and OC in other ways as well. Enforcement's asset management unit collaborated with those divisions and successfully developed and used risk-based analytics to detect aberrational or unusual performance. And so essentially, with hedge funds. So essentially the program developed some risk models and technology in-house in order to examine performance data of thousands of hedge funds and hedge fund advisors for unexpected performance. So for example, you may have a hedge fund that reports significantly results that are significantly better than their peers in terms of results throughout both good and bad markets. So we'd be able to flesh that out. So this program has allowed us to identify candidates that may be appropriate for further examination or investigation, and to ensure that we are able to take proactive steps to protect investors from misconduct such as Ponzi schemes. So we have many other examples of data analytics and technology in action. Just a few more I'd like to share with you. Enforcement and OC, often with assistance and collaboration with folks in DARPA, have employed text analytics and topic modeling to analyze text across numerous documents, public filings, disclosures, registrations, to find themes and apply, various risk factors and rankings to those topics. We also use an enterprise data analytics platform to identify links between various individuals and entities. This is link analysis by connecting pieces of information and data from multiple sources. So this link analysis enables us to look for relationships between two or more very disparate data sources that would not have otherwise been apparent, just using our human minds and abilities. So for example, we can, perform link analysis on thousands of lines of data and phone records to see if people maybe had phone calls in common. Again, we may not have a tip. People may be obscuring their relationships in the real world, but through, data and data analytics, we can link them together. We can also combine the outputs of these models with additional intelligence, such as, the tips, complaints, referrals, the SARs we get, intelligence we get on IP addresses. That's a big one now, linking IP addresses with other information we have on people, places, and things. So the enforcement division, including OMI and CIRCA, continues to collaborate and work very closely with DARPA, with OC, with others in the SEC, as well as our partners outside the agency, to consider new ways to develop and apply analytic tools and approaches to areas that most directly affect our investors. A few other things I think I'd like to highlight for you all. To that end, in enforcement, we recently created a retail strategy task force, which will leverage the data analytics and systems that we've successfully developed and deployed in other areas, and apply them more broadly to look for incidents of widespread misconduct aimed at retail investors. So again, I spoke earlier of the value of collaboration and bringing together folks from different disciplines, have groups that look across them, maybe focus, can, brainstorm, look at how, successes in other areas, come up with ways to apply what we've developed more broadly. So we're really trying to build capabilities, and which is different than ad hoc projects. We're really focused on trying to build analytic capabilities that can be applied to different types of fraud, different types of issues. As priorities change and evolve, we want to make sure that what we build is flexible, is adaptable and scalable and can be leveraged. In addition, the Enforcement Division recently created a new specialized unit to focus on cyber-related misconduct that affects our securities markets and investors. So here, this is quite interesting, a very new developing area. We're using some specialized tools to identify and analyze potential misconduct that occurs on or relates to the dark web. And also to find and draw connections between digital identities and digital wallets. So tracing Bitcoin and all. So we're just now, with our new cyber unit, developing those specialties, and we have acquired and are deploying some special tools in those areas. We're also using the analytical skills and tools to combine and analyze data, on IP addresses, and other information that we have to try and detect and investigate cases where cyber-related misconduct is used to gain an advantage in an unlawful advantage in the securities market. So an example of this would be, someone uses hacked brokerage accounts to conduct manipulative trading. So they break in, they take over an account and use it to conduct manipulative trading and profit from that. So like numerous other industries, I think SEC's enforcement violation detection efforts are really on the edge of this machine learning revolution. So right now we're exploring and have been applying some machine learning models to try and look across many data features. This allows us to simultaneously look across many sets of data, many factors, and allows us to make decisions very quickly. And not only do more sophisticated analytic techniques and machine learning technology allow us to otherwise detect misconduct that would go unnoticed, but it really saves our resources as an agency because we're wasting less time and effort focusing on conduct that maybe exhibited one suspicious factor, or you didn't know whether or not it was suspicious and really had to do a deep dive to figure out whether it was worth going forward with any kind of exam or investigation, but was not. So significantly, and I think Austin's going to touch on this in his presentation, our analysts and developers are able to employ open source language packages such as Python and R to develop and build some in-house advanced analytical tools and capabilities to really allow us to utilize the data sets we have in new and flexible ways. So the fact that effective machine learning, text analytics, and other techniques are now available in open source packages has just been very important to us as a government agency with limited resources. It's really enabled us to create our own detection systems much more efficiently than before. And that allows us to contextualize data and really shift to a more proactive and focused assessment of potential wrongdoing. With that said, I think I've spoken enough with some interest to you all. Happy to talk, further later, but I'd really like to now turn it over to Austin, who's going to talk further about data and analytics.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I will give a brief overview of my office, of DARPA, and then also I'll discuss data and analytics in my division, but also in the SEC at large, and some of the areas that we're looking to advance and expand in the future. So I lead the Office of Research and Data Services and the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis. My office is an interdisciplinary group. We have approximately 25 full-time staff and another 25 contractors who support our work. We have physicists, we have mathematicians, we have financial economists, we have data engineers, so on and so forth. So we're kind of a mixture of a lot of different expertise. And one of the themes in our office, but also a theme in DARPA as a whole, is data, the data lifecycle, and managing every part of the data lifecycle. Because we're small and because we're relatively close to the data, we can experiment with cutting edge techniques. We can test things out, we can incubate them, and then bring it to the rest of the SEC. So that's really kind of the value add of my office within the SEC is really experimenting with cutting edge things and then bringing it to enforcement, bringing it to the policy divisions, bringing it to compliance inspections, exams, so on and so forth. And I'll give some examples of that and a little bit later in the presentation. So about DARPA. So DARPA is the newest division within the SEC. It was formed in 2009. It originally had a different name. It's a merger of 3 offices: the Office of Economic Analysis, the Office of Interactive Data, and the Office of Risk Assessment. So again, we're combining together economic analysis with data and then also assessing risk. And again, I'll get to that in a little bit, but data is really the theme, and the data lifecycle is the theme within DARPA. Current composition, approximately 170 staff organized within 8 offices. We have approximately 80 PhDs. And again, they're coming from economics, accounting, statistics, math, physics. As was mentioned earlier, my PhD is in physics. We have approximately 20 highly trained quants. These are individuals who usually have master's degrees, not necessarily PhDs, but they work with wrangling data and so on. And then we have attorneys as well. Our core competencies are in financial economics, advanced analytics, data standards, disclosure technology, database management, data engineering, so on and so forth. And then finally, application and tool development. So our mission, we have 5 primary functions. I won't go through all of these, but if you look at it, you know, it follows the data lifecycle. For example, the third is the processing and use of data, provisioning of data for the rest of the, for DARPA's use, but then also for the rest of the SEC's use. On my staff, we ingest over a billion records a day, and provision that, make that available in high-performance computing environments for the rest of the SEC staff. And then furthermore, we develop cutting-edge customized risk assessment applications. We support the Division of Enforcement through sophisticated economics and statistical analysis. We also support the policy divisions with fundamental research. Again, so we're taking data, we're processing it, we're putting it into environments. We do analysis over the top, and then finally, we publish on the SEC website white papers, academic publications, and so on. So we provide in fundamental research in support of the SEC's mission to the public. So as I mentioned, DARPA is involved in the full life cycle of the data. And what's interesting about being in a regulatory agency, we have the ability to design the way that data is submitted and the way that data is formed. Oftentimes, if you work in the private sector, you have to take data as is, right? But what's interesting about being in the SEC is we're designing and structuring the way in which the entities that we regulate disclose information. And that's housed within, the experts in that area are housed within DARPA. We have the Office of Structured Disclosure in DARPA. So again, they're working to define the schema for structured data as it's filed within the SEC. So again, that's the very first bit, is designing how data should come in. And then the ingestion and provisioning of data, again, this is largely housed. There are others within the commission who do this, but it's largely housed within DARPA. Analysis, and again, as I mentioned, because we have PhDs in DARPA and they're interdisciplinary, especially in my office, we can really kind of focus on these cutting edge techniques and experiment with those. And then finally, publication. So this is either through academic papers or white papers, and we're looking into publishing statistics as well to the public. The future direction of data and analytics within the SEC, it's really around 2 areas. One is comprehensive and streamlined data management and governance. And we could talk about this during the Q&A session, but of course, before you can do any analytics, you have to really wrangle the data. And in the SEC, we expend a lot of resources doing that, but you have to. And it's one of those jobs that you don't get a lot of recognition for doing, but it's extremely important. And those institutions that have very strong data management and data governance can do amazing things over the top. And so I'll discuss some of the areas in which we're trying to push. DARPA in collaboration with OIT, but also in collaboration with the other divisions is really trying to push forward. And then finally, advanced analytics on unstructured and or large data sets. So there's a large corpus of data that comes into the SEC that's unstructured. Of course, we're moving more and more towards structuring the data, but to the extent that the data in the past and also some of the other forms and filings that come in, it's text-based, it's non-structured. How do we analyze that data? It's a very large corpus of information that comes in. It's a burden on those that we regulate to provide that information. So we want to make sure that it's used properly, not only in the SEC but externally as well, and fully used to its potential. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this future direction. There's a recent formation of an SEC-wide data management committee that is looking at these issues around data management, data governance, and then also data analytics potentially. I co-chair that committee, and the initiatives that we're currently focusing on are really the design and build of a future enterprise-wide data management and analytics platform, which is most likely going to be cloud-based. A lot of our activity currently is on-premise. We have high-performance computing environments on-premise, but of course, when you move to the cloud, this allows you access to the best and the latest technology, and then also on-demand scaling up, scaling down, so on and so forth. The design and build of an enterprise data catalog, and this is extremely important. I can discuss this a bit more. And then finally, an enterprise code repository. So why are these things important? I think these are important because when you think about big data and you think about a lot of the advances that we have, and the buzzword now is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on and so forth. I think if you look at Google Trends, especially in the financial services sector, you'll see that it's exploded in the last few years. There's a lot of talk about fintech, techfin, so on and so forth. Now, are any of the things that we're doing in that space new? I don't know. I think a lot of the techniques that were developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. So what is it that's new? And why are we talking about big data? Why are we talking about AI? Why are we talking about machine learning in the financial services sector now? I think it's simply because we have the infrastructure in place in order to analyze big data. We have the software that allows us to drag and drop pieces. And then we also have developed communities and sharing of information. So all of that together allows us to really ramp up a lot of the things that in the past, we already had these techniques. Some of the machine learning techniques that we're using in the SEC, these are from the 50s and 60s. It sounds sexy, but really the techniques were developed early on, and we just now have the capabilities to really leverage it, share information, and so on. So that is really the infrastructure, right? It's the infrastructure which is allowing this. It isn't necessarily advancements in the actual analytic techniques. So it's extremely important. That's why I bring this up. It's extremely important that within the SEC, and I think also, and we can discuss it in the Q&A, for other regulators and other institutions to really focus on developing that infrastructure, allowing for that infrastructure to be, to use the latest and greatest technologies that can scale up, scale down as needed, to allow for data governance and information about data to be shared and to be easily accessible. That can be through a catalog or other means. And then finally allowing for individuals to develop communities of expertise and to share information through code repositories or through other kind of software and so on. For analytics, kind of the future direction, so we've launched in DARPA, we've launched new initiatives that leverage machine learning, particularly in the area of risk assessment, but also in some of the other areas for just fundamental research on data sets and understanding what's going on in markets and with the entities that we regulate. So these are just some of the techniques that we're using, some of the data sets and so on. I won't go into detail here, but I will discuss on the next slide some of the analytics that we're doing in DARPA. So on the left-hand side here is just showing some of the unstructured data. Again, a lot of the data that comes into the SEC, not all of it, but a lot of the data that comes into the SEC is unstructured. And how do you start working with that? Well, you have to use natural language processing, text analytics techniques in order to structure the data. And so some of the examples here, you can do topic analysis. Basically, you're taking the filings that come in, the text that comes in, and you're condensing down that information into several different topics. And so therefore you've taken filings that come in, you have topics which sit over the top of each one of the filings that come in, and then you can do analytics on those topics, right? So now you've structured the data more. Entity extraction as well, you can find out information on the entities. Again, you're pulling out structure from unstructured data. And again, there's other techniques as well that work in natural language processing and text analytics, which allow us to put structure on the top of unstructured data. And then once you have structured data, there's a lot of techniques you can use. And again, these aren't necessarily new techniques. I mean, obviously, they're continually advancing, but the basic ideas of these techniques have existed for a long time. So for example, inlier outlier detection, why is this important? Well, it's important for two reasons. One is detection of fraud. If you see an outlier in the data, this is a signal that potentially somebody is doing something that requires further investigation and could be fraudulent or could be something that is a bad actor at play. The other is to find new trends in the market. To the extent that there's an outlier, that actually may be an innovation. That may be something that's fantastic and great and that we want to foster. So again, the outlier detection, it's important to use these techniques to find evidence of potential fraud, but also to look for trends in markets. Dimensionality reduction, this is just really, and again, you know, the simplest form is principal component analysis, where you have a huge number of variables, a huge number of data points, a huge number of variables of interest in the data. How do you find out those variables which are most important? Of course, you can have subject matter experts that come in and provide their expertise to tell you which variables are important. But again, you know, coming from physics, I like to also look at the data and let the data tell me what's important. I think that coming at it from both angles is extremely important. But taking it from the data, you can do principal component analysis or other kinds of dimensionality reduction in order to let you know which variables are of most importance or which linear combination of variables are of most importance. Clustering techniques, so that's up here in the right-hand corner. Again, this is a way of doing data-driven analysis, for example, of taxonomies. So in the SEC, we have our own way of developing taxonomies. Again, it's using subject matter experts who say, okay, we have broker-dealers. These broker-dealers go into these 5 different buckets, and that's our taxonomy. However, the data may be telling us something else. Again, there could be trends in markets that we're behind because we're not actually looking at the data. We may not be plugged in to those trends. But you can use the data to inform you. And again, it's a data-driven way of doing taxonomies. You use the data to tell you how institutions are clustering according to their activities. And again, it's extremely important to have subject matter experts who understand the legal constraints or the legal landscape, and then also those who have experienced in industry and working in these institutions, but then finally the data. Again, the proof's in the pudding. And the data, are they actually acting according to these different taxonomic groups or not? And again, you can use clustering techniques, k-means clustering, but other clustering techniques that have existed for a long time in order to glean that kind of understanding. And then finally, network analysis. Again, network analysis, what's really the value add of network analysis? And there's probably many things, but what I see as the value add here is that you find systemically important nodes or things that are really important that otherwise you may have missed. And they're important because of the connections and the centrality and so on. So for example, you don't always want to look at institutions that are the largest or entities that are the largest and classify those as the most important. That's the simplest thing to do. But when you do network analysis, sometimes you find out that there's connectors. They're not necessarily huge, but they're extremely important for the ecosystem of the financial markets or financial services because they connect. And if you take them out, everything breaks apart and you have huge problems. So again, network analysis really allows you to observe the importance based on connections rather than importance based on size or other things that are more apparent. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the different techniques. And again, I'll show you a specific example of some of these techniques, going from unstructured to structured data, and then finally on to an example of how you can leverage machine learning techniques to more efficiently, in this case, more efficiently do our examinations and enforcement activity within the SEC. And this is my last slide, so I'll end on this example. But again, filings come in, they're unstructured. They don't necessarily, so they're text-based. Some of the information actually might be structured. A lot of the times filings have structured bits and then unstructured bits. We'll peel off the structured bits and then that'll go into our analysis, but we also will take the unstructured bits and make it more structured. Through topic analysis, as was mentioned on the previous slide, you can do text analytics to do topic analysis and then tonality analysis. That then goes into a supervised learning process, and supervised learning here is basically you're training. What you do is you take a corpus of information from the past, filings from the past, and with specific outcomes that you want to train towards, because you want to predict outcomes based on the information that's coming in. We have examination, we have prior examination and enforcement outcomes, and we'll train the previous data sets that we had that had been filed with us towards those outcomes. You use these supervised, and again, the supervision part is you're supervising towards those outcomes, and you're finding combinations of the variables that lead to the best predictor of those types of enforcement and examination outcomes. And so this then is a way of, we have limited resources in the SEC to inspect and also to examine and to put individuals from enforcement on investigations. So we want to target those firms that we think are partaking in risky behavior. And this is a way for us to use the information that we have in the past in order to more effectively put those resources on examination or investigations. Okay. So with that, I think we can open it up to some Q&A, and I look forward to discussing with you guys. And I think we'll be mostly after a bit as well, and can interact and discuss things with you privately.
First, let me say thanks for a fascinating presentation. And I recognize that, of course, you can't go into details of individual examples at kind of the 10-foot level, and spend a lot of time at a great level at the 25,000 foot. But let me ask a kind of 100,000 foot level question, which is kind of the crux of this, I think. If you're saying, for example, we've got a great new analytic technique, and you know what, we need people with newer, different expertise or more people. We need to hire 10 more analysts, maybe a couple of programmers or what have you. How do you make the case to the budget folks, the CFO folks, the congressional folks to say, here's what we'll get if we apply some additional effort and some new techniques from the analytics? Do you say, it's going to help us prevent this much fraud, this many millions of dollars of fraud, or it's going to help us reduce the level of effort needed amongst our inspection or investigation staff? What do you say? And again, as concretely as possible, what have been the cases you've made at the SEC in the past to be able to make the investments that you're describing?
So I can speak to that a little bit from DARPA's perspective. Really, we focus more on efficiency gains. So we've said, the more you invest in this, the less that you would have to invest in other areas within the SEC. So that could either be on the operation side, like I didn't discuss at all, but these techniques can also be used to make operations within the SEC more efficient. Mm-hmm. For example, if you do reviews of different filings that come in, you can do text analytics, which allows you to do a first cut, a first pass of review of those things, and then it makes that process more efficient. You need less eyes on it, or those eyes can focus on those filings which are flagged as needing more likely to need review, and so on and so forth. So it's really, I think in DARPA, it's mainly been about especially in this environment, it's mainly been about efficiency gains, and we can expend less resources in this area and allow more in here. Again, it's extremely important that you show wins and that you show small successes. Yeah. And again, that's why within DARPA and also within my office, we're experimenting. We at least have a team that can experiment and show prototypes. A lot of the stuff we do is with prototypes. Mm-hmm. And then just showing how this could be leveraged and expanded out. Absent that, us just saying sophisticated words and saying you need to provide, especially in this environment, doesn't quite work. So, yeah.
One of the things I have looked at...
Can you speak loudly, and let me also remind the speakers, if you don't mind asking or repeating the questions so the folks in the back of the room and online can hear it, hopefully.
Okay. One of the things I've been looking at, I know the Consolidated Audit Trail was a big project the SEC was particularly looking at as part of this Dodd-Frank, and I think that the Rule 613, which required a national market system. Now, from the standpoint of taking the street and say 58 billion transactions and things like that used for your forensics, I know Dodd-Frank, it may not necessarily be involved with the current administration, but it's still with a consolidated audit trail type concept, an enormous way to do your forensics and be able to mitigate a lot of the risk. Are there other projects that may not necessarily be as large as the Consolidated Audit Trail project, which was supposed to be around $2.8 billion in costs? Are there other projects that the SEC is looking at to provide the kinds of repositories so they can do the forensics to mitigate a lot of the risks that we've had in the past?
Yeah, just as an initial matter, and I'll turn it over to Austin, we do have something we refer to as blue sheet data. It's transactional data of trades currently. It's not of the scope of the proposed consolidated audit trail, but we do, collect and have access to a vast amount of trading data, including, having operations that collect and, analyze that data. Some of the ones I talked about, but there are others as well. Austin, did you want to add to that?
Sure, I can. So again, thanks. So the question was on the Consolidated Audit Trail, and then
Right,
also
and
that's a very, very large repository that's being built of it's an audit trail for all transactions and orders and order handling and the equities and options space. Again, it's going to be fantastic when it comes online. We can do a lot of interesting and cool things with that data when it comes online. Is there anything else that's in the works? Absolutely, there's always things in the works. So something that I can mention are, and a lot of it's around, we already collect filings, but doing it better, structuring the data that comes in. For example, import INSIN. So this is an initiative that's underway. It should come on. I think INSIN is coming online in a few months. This is all in the public space, so you can look it up. So this is information on investment funds, information on their structure, information on their portfolio holdings, and so on. All of that will be structured data, and it comes in, and a lot of it will be made public. And so therefore, you can come to the SEC's website, use Edgar to pull that information in a structured way and do some really cool and interesting things. We will obviously be using it within the SEC, but also it's made available to the public. So again, the idea is if you design these things, design them right and machine readable, then you can really leverage analytic techniques and crowdsource a lot of interesting things on top of the data. And so that's really, and we're constantly thinking about ways in which we can structure more data. We can make that data more efficient so that it's used properly in the SEC, but also by the public.
Can I do a quick follow-up? When you're looking at the types of processes and systems, are they going to be more open source based versus proprietary?
So the question was, in general, are we moving more towards open source rather than proprietary? And I can say just simply because of cost reasons, absolutely. I mean, we most certainly always are looking at open source solutions as opposed to proprietary solutions because we don't want to be locked in, we don't want to, and we don't want to expend money where it's not necessary to do so.
I'm curious, in this forum specifically, we're kind of trying to think about cross-agency collaboration. You mentioned, I think it was Jennifer, that you had some early collaboration with DARPA a lot. And so my question is, how did that arise? And to a particular example in this room, there are folks here from the IRS who are saying, hey, maybe we have some interest in some of the things SEC might learn. And there are other folks who are perhaps making loans or loan guarantees that might be interested in kind of some of your fraud analytic techniques. And not just that, but also, have you found some particular fraudulent organizations with whom they might want to be very wary? So tell us a little bit about how interagency collaboration happens. And maybe, again, if it's possible to say with respect to DARPA, who came up with the idea? How did you overcome the hurdles about sharing data and agencies kind of opening a kimono? Can you share anything about that?
Yeah, so actually with DARPA, it really was a grassroots idea. Some folks on our staff, I saw a program about some of their analytical capabilities that were applied in the human trafficking realm. So basically analyzing, scraping data from the internet to try and apply it to stop human trafficking. And I think this is a great example of just when you encourage brainstorming and information sharing and collaboration, someone came back, started talking to different analysts. Everyone's, sparks started flying, wheels started spinning, and people just started thinking, well, is there some way we could take this technology that's being used in a completely different context and perhaps, apply it somewhere in a way that we could use? I mean, there's all sorts of nefarious conduct going on, on the internet, all sorts of fraud and other schemes. Could it be adapted? And there was outreach. I think our general counsel and chief counsel were involved, in the legal aspects. Agencies can do memorandum of understanding, MOUs as we call them. Can work out the parameters of those discussions and relationships up front. The relationship and interaction doesn't always have to be that formal. We can start, usually start with more informal discussions, but if it does rise to the level of a more formal information sharing program, there are ways to do that. And I think, sometimes people shy away sometimes from trying to interact with another agency because they think, oh, there's a lot of paperwork or red tape involved. But really, there's all sorts of ways to interact and have conversations, have demonstrations, brainstorming sessions without, it rising to the level of formal information sharing. With the DARPA example, they did, managed to formalize a relationship and were able to go in and kind of get some hands-on experience and pilot some of those things. And we continue to think about, whether there are opportunities there.
Yeah. We may have to chat with you about whether or not REI's Office of Comptroller of the Currency client might want to enter into some sort of similar agreement.
PhDs and master's degrees in analytics. A lot of the use cases you bring up require some degree of special purpose hardware or equipment that's tuned to run these types of algorithms. What I'm curious is, do you see that agency IT and contractors are able to keep pace with the demands of these types of use cases in the sense that they're racking, hardware accelerated FPGAs, GPUs in an enterprise data center, or is a lot of this work that's more cutting edge being forced into a lab that's maybe not as interconnected with the rest of enterprise IT?
Okay, so the question is, some of these techniques require specialized hardware and so on, and your question, you were mentioning, are we able to handle that as an enterprise, or does it need to be located within a division? Was that your question, or is it simply that it needs to be outsourced?
Well, I guess more is it sitting in a DARPA lab where folks in DARPA are fully responsible for the end-to-end solution,
Sure.
or does agency IT, is it able to provide the hardware requirements for these use cases?
Sure, I think it depends on the use case. So I think we're still experimenting here. In some instances, it actually exists within one of the divisions, and they are the ones. It still is provisioned by OIT, but for the most part, all of the it's still procured by OIT, but a lot of the maintenance, a lot of the configuration, a lot of the day-to-day maintenance and so on is located within the division because they had to develop the expertise because it may not have been supported by the enterprise. Others, we've tried to do it, I would say, more as an enterprise to the extent that there's 3 or 4 divisions that all want to use those techniques. But we're experimenting and working through kind of that exact issue. To some extent, this can be solved also by outsourcing some of this stuff. Again, when you move to the cloud and you move to external providers that allow you to scale up and scale down and with different hardware, it makes things simpler, right? It makes it allows those people who need it to only have access when they need it, and then also allows you very quickly to share that resource across all the different divisions. So, for example, and we've talked with some of the other divisions who have some more sophisticated equipment. We would like to use their equipment, especially during periods of time when they're not using it, right? And it's much more difficult to form those relationships and to form those agreements when you have specific hardware. It's much easier when you can spin up, spin down things.
Just kind of as a follow-on, you talked a little bit about perhaps sharing the hardware or capacity within SEC. Do you systematically share either hardware capacity, tools, or expertise, for example, with FBI or IRS criminal investigation or other components of government outside the SEC entirely?
Yeah, so I mean, I think here we do have, we have to be careful when it comes to certain activities because there are legal obligations and implications that are created if you're doing, a joint investigation versus a parallel investigation. But that being said, outside the context of specific investigations, we do collaborate with the FBI on a more broader programmatic level, which is really, geared towards just information sharing and coordination. So within OMI, we actually have FBI agents and analysts embedded on detail in our unit, and they're there to help, outside the investigative context to kind of foster information sharing. They've been helpful setting up programs, bringing in expertise speakers on the dark web, other cybersecurity issues as well. So I think again, it's more on the collaborative level and information sharing, and it's been very helpful.
So you're not the IT provider for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN? You don't do all of their IT work?
No.
Oh, coincidentally, actually it was FinCEN that I was thinking about as a follow-on question with collaboration. And they came out with some guidance, it's almost a year and a half now, on organizations looking to have their anti-money laundering folks collaborating with their cybersecurity folks, because a lot of the activities are fueled by cybercrime. And I haven't seen any results of that, and wondered whether you saw results of organizations doing a better job internally of sharing that information in their organization, because anti-money laundering and cybersecurity separately are two focus areas for the SEC. Have you seen any results of that?
Okay, yes. So the question was about collaboration between and information sharing and feedback from the SEC to FinCEN in the context of money laundering. And had we provided any feedback or seen any results of our feedback or guidance we provided? You gave a specific example of one rule. I will say generally, our Bank Secrecy Act Review Group does provide feedback to FinCEN. FinCEN actively seeks it from government agencies. So as FinCEN develops, its technology and its forms, we, along with other agencies, the CFTC, have given input. It's been along the lines of what I think Austin was referring to. I think as people think about, are there ways to better structure information in forms, or make information that we, along with other agencies and law enforcement, have access to more useful. They're very receptive to that. So, yes, we've given feedback along those lines, and yes, we have seen actually that feedback in some contexts incorporated. So it's been a very positive, good relationship.
I was actually thinking about the publicly traded companies who were told that they need to internally collaborate between their own organizations' efforts. And I wondered in your enforcement actions whether if you were looking at a company in the anti-money laundering context and said, did you, and whether there was any correlation between whether they actually collaborated or not, or looked at them for a cybersecurity violation. Because the idea was for companies to take the guidance that they needed to, since the financial services sector is fairly mature in its anti-money laundering processes and infrastructure, not so mature in the cybersecurity area. So I just wondered whether the SEC was seeing the results of companies listening to that guidance, but maybe it's too early.
Yeah, so I think the question was, is the SEC seeing, outside financial companies implement some of the guidance from FinCEN in the anti-money laundering area? I think, primarily that, there's a broad range of entities that are subject to anti-money laundering laws. So, we focus on, specific ones under the SEC's jurisdiction, many are not. So they have FinCEN, they have their own, regulators that look at that. So I wouldn't be able to speak to that from the point of view of from FinCEN's point of view or the point of view of the other regulators that have jurisdiction over it. But, I think you can see from our public enforcement cases, we do look at anti-money laundering compliance in the context of enforcement and investigations.
Hi, I have two questions. First question is, how do you deal with all that sophistication in terms of productizing the results of the research? Because, so what is the cycle of introducing new research into production to discover possible frauds? That's the first question. Because it probably is more difficult than the chart that we are showing here. And the second question that I have is, those techniques are statistical, so there is certain level of false positives that you have. So could you describe the process, how you translate what you do to the investigators, because they are not PhDs from applied mathematics. They are people that understands the problems and understands how to investigate the problem, but they not necessarily need to understand those kind of things, even though they are on the market for a long time. And the second thing, what is the ratio of false positives that goes out from your office?
So I can talk a little bit about those questions. So the first one was correct me if I'm wrong, how do we deal with implementing new versions of the process? So
imagine your R&D department discovers something that is worth introducing into production.
Yep.
So how do you introduce your research into production? Because it's, it needs to go through certain cycles. And so what is the time frame of doing that? So productizing your research.
So I can speak to that a little bit. When you say go into production, we are not at the stage where the production is done by a third body. It's not like we have developers developing something and then we hand it over to somebody else in production and so on. We still house all of it from development to production. So going from development to production is fairly quick. It can be very quick, and it's just then communicating the results that we're finding. So it's the individual or the group that is in charge of that process, who is doing the development and the production together. And again, it can be pretty quick, and they're constantly tweaking things, constantly using new techniques. To the extent that we have more sophisticated hardware and can implement some of the more sophisticated techniques, then we can share that with examiners, share that with people in enforcement who are doing investigations almost immediately. And again, they understand, they're not waiting by a certain date and realize they can't talk to us until that date. We will reach out to them and say, hey, you know what? I know we gave you that list before, but we've done some further analysis and we've tweaked things, and these are the new ones that we would like you to consider and so on. So again, it's still, because it's more small, more nimble, it allows us to have more flexibility, and we can turn and pivot and provide more information. And to the extent that we develop these relationships with the various groups who are trying to implement the, who go off on exams and so on, they understand. It's a personal relationship in addition to just handing over a number. So you can discuss and talk and so on, and provide that information in a less formal environment so that they can start implementing it. The second thing, it's a very important point: false positive, false negatives, and also ensuring that those who are receiving the information understand how to interpret it. Again, because it's smaller scale, because it's something that is not a formal handover type process, it makes it easier, and we can just. That's one of the main things. And so the skill set here is really interesting, because you need somebody, or it could be in a group, but you need somebody who's really good at the technique, but they also need to know how to communicate that technique to people who are going to be using the numbers. It's very difficult to find staff like that. I've been lucky. Some of my staff are very good across that spectrum. But really you have to look for those types of individuals so that they can disclose and help people know how to interpret. But you're exactly right. There is false positive, there's false negatives. People in general know what it means to be a false positive, false negative, even if they don't know what those terms mean. They understand it when you describe it to them exactly what you're stating. And you just mention that to them. You say that, you know, this one tends to have more false positives than false negatives, and so therefore when you interpret it, realize that you may have to tweak the way that you're interpreting or using the number in your exams. So,
and I would just add to that, we don't jump right from the output to full-blown investigation.
Yeah,
There's steps in between, and we do have folks in enforcement. We have former traders, people with expertise in the markets, and who can take these outputs and interpret them and help translate them to attorneys. And so we know, right? We know that there's going to be extra steps. And those folks also work closely with the developers and help them test, as they test the results against actual prior cases to see, all right, are the outcomes you're getting, if we have data from data sets from where we know what happened, how accurate is it?
Yolanda?
I have a question about governance. Austin, I know that DARPA is pretty mature along that data maturity model there. But could you talk a little bit about the governance and the evolution as to how all of that happened? Because you're sharing a lot of data internally and externally. But governance is a very important aspect of getting this right.
No, absolutely. So to me, the governance problem is handled with two things. One, you have to build the infrastructure that allows people who are doing these activities to share information about those activities, and also a repository for them to put information. For example, if they're collecting the documentation and they're tasked with creating documentation for each data set, they need a place to put that, which is then shared with the users. If they have important information on the data set, insights on the data site, information on when it's loading, you have to have that infrastructure, and DARPA was early on in the commission realized that and developed a catalog. We're now expanding that catalog for the rest of the commission's use and for other divisions to use as well, but that catalog is really extremely important. So the infrastructure needs to be in place for the individuals who are tasked with governance activities to store that information and to share that information with the user base. So that's one, the infrastructure. The second thing you need is individuals. You have to have people tasked on this, and no one, like going to my boss or my boss going to the COO to ask for money, so on and so forth. It's very difficult to say, no, well, actually, we need a lot of resources to deal with, because they want to expend the resources on the analytics, right? They don't want to expend the resources on the governance. So it's extremely important that you just have people who dig their heels in and say, no, we have to get this right. We have to have bodies who are spending time ensuring that we have proper documentation on each data set, ensuring that we have quality checks on each data set, ensuring that the data is loaded on time, and to the extent that it's not, we can very quickly get it back up and running. And so it's the people and the infrastructure that need to be in place.
So we have time, I think, for one more question, although fortunately Jennifer and Austin have described that they're willing to stick around afterwards for you if you'd like to ask them individual questions. Let's have one last question before we wrap up.
Are you looking at any non-text-based unstructured data sets? Certainly the compliance departments and the financial institutions doing audio and video. Are you guys doing any kind of parallel efforts to that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
So non-text.
What is it? So audio or video? That's actually an excellent question. I believe some people, there's academics who work and they've come into the SEC, and I believe there might even be some people working. I would say nothing that is in, that I'm aware of, and I have limited knowledge of everything that goes on, but nothing that I'm aware of in DARPA where we're doing something systematic in that space. But transcripts from, for example, earnings calls, those kinds of things are available, but oftentimes you go from the transcript, right? So somebody is taking the audio and transcribing it into text, and then you do the text analytics on the top. So most often it's still text analytics. It's just a pre-processing stage. We're still early stages.
We're seeing a lot of growth there in text space.
Absolutely, sure.
So let me say again, thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise. I hope that you do find some folks in the room who might be either offering SEC something or that you could offer something to help improve their success at achieving their mission. And we look forward to you continuing to participate in the analytics community. Thanks so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure hearing from you. And for those I didn't have a chance to touch base with earlier, we're always looking for suggestions about topics or agencies or speakers that you would like to hear from in the future. In about 2 months, we'll have another edition with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid making a presentation.